At $200, a Super Nintendo setup costs twice as much as the old system. For the money, the company promises better pictures, sound, and adventure. Now you're playing with power, superpower. You're the king, I tell you! The king!
Only for Super NES. Only on Super NES. You're listening to the SNES podcast with your host, Soul Blazer.
Hello, everybody. This is Super NES podcast. I am Greg, joined always by Joe.
Hello.
We are covering this episode 228, another basketball-themed game. It wasn't originally planned to do these back to back, but it does kind of make sense, to kind of like theme these together. I mean, like we did do the recent movie tie-in games. Theming those games together recently. So again, it makes sense. It makes sense to do basketball stuff back to back. Although marginally, at least Chaos Winning City had basketball elements in it, which is more than I can say for this game. But it is at least tentatively basketball themed.
I mean, it's hinted at in the story.
Well, yeah, that's true. And you do have like a pretty famous basketball star as being like the main one of the main characters. So I mean, there's that connection. We're covering the very infamous Shaq Fu in this episode, which I've never played the game before. So I'm curious. I was curious to see exactly. Does the game live up to its hype as far as being like a very, very bad game? Because in my experience, honestly, like all the games people talk up as being bad games are not really that bad, and usually games nobody ever mentions I find games that are much, much worse usually. Yeah. So it's usually how it seems to go. But I should just do this game. But Joe, if I remember correctly, you already experienced playing this game on Genesis, right?
Yeah, so this is one of the games I had growing up with my Genesis.
I feel sorry for you.
Yeah. So back in the 90s, you couldn't open up a video game magazine or even a comic book at that time without seeing an advertisement for Shaq Fu. I
was going to mention that's part of the history, yes.
Yeah, they overhyped this game. So Little Joe was definitely getting Shaq Fu because it was hyped, and that means his parents, who absolutely knew nothing, absolutely saw the advertisements at well and figured, hey, if we're seeing the advertisements all over the place, it must be a good game. I learned to love this game, owning it on the Genesis. It's definitely, it took a lot of getting used to, and as soon as I got Street Fighter 2 and eventually Super Street Fighter 2, Shaq Fu went away. I don't even know where it went. It got misplaced somewhere, and I never saw it again.
Well, spoiler. I think spoiler. You had the better version of two games anyway. So as for Genesis versus Super NES, Shaq Fu. So
correct.
So at least you had that going for you.
Yeah. And that's what I wanted to just say before we get into the Super Nintendo version is the Genesis version was stacked. They had there was 8 or 9 playable characters. It had 3 extra stages that aren't present in the Super Nintendo version, and on top of that, like I felt like the game was designed for the Genesis, and then it was just ported over. Much like what was the other game that was like that?
There's a bunch. There's a bunch of games you can say that about.
We recently covered a couple, but anyways, so I think this is the same kind of situation where spoiler, the Genesis version is better. But we'll get into the merits that this game does have. Yeah,
it's hard to say for sure exactly if you're right or not, because it's like on one hand, the Genesis Super NES versions of the game got released the exact same day. The game came out. The game came out with systems like October 28th, 1994. With getting released in Europe later on that year. However, the company that developed this game a company we've already covered several times already, like Delphine Software, their bread and butter experience was for Genesis. So I'm inclined to believe that they probably had their A team working Genesis version of the game because that's the system they had more experience with. That system that they made like Out of This World for, and like Flashback and whatever. So
that's what I was thinking of, Flashback and Out of This World.
So it's like, I think probably, even though the games came out at the same time, they must have been developed. They must have been developed therefore at the same time. I think the quality of the experience the programmers assigned the project shows as far as the game, because you have to believe an experienced team. If Konami or Capcom had worked on this, for example, they wouldn't have cut corners to cut out as much of Super NES version of the game like as they did. Yeah. So I think pretty much it comes down to not any kind of mouse, just be like, okay, this is the system we have our experience for. We'll just assign our A team of programmers to work on this version instead. So, Shaq Fu, however, was planning to be a big success. We already mentioned the marketing and whatnot for it, because the game also got ported to the Game Gear, Game Boy, and Amiga the following year as well too. So other systems got this game as well. Other companies handled it. So other companies handled the development of those systems, but Delphine did handle the development of both the Genesis Super NES version. Electronic Arts was the publisher for most versions of the game, except for the Game Boy version, and Ocean Software published the game in Europe as usual per their contract. So so the 90s were a weird time in game history in many ways, and I think the proliferation of basketball at least inspired games that came out during this time period are another example of this, because besides Chaos and Windy City and Shaq Fu, you also had a I don't know if you played it, I don't know if you played in these games, Joe, but you also had the very first one-on-one F&B basketball game with Slam City, like Scottie Pippen, around this time period as well. The very terrible movie adaptation of White Man Can't Jump, which was not a good game on any system. You even had NBA Jam having the burning people in smash backboards. Right. So it's it was just a weird time for sports games, period. So it's once again you had like Michael Jordan, you had a case where it's somebody had an idea for the video game. Apparently, like when I read, Shaquille O'Neal was signed on originally to appear in a video game for Electronic Arts. What kind of game, I don't know. Probably some kind of sports themed game, because during this time period, Shaq definitely was known in the early 90s. He was still with the he was still pretty new to the league. He was with the Magic during this time period, which was the first team. So it's he became better known in later years when he had all those championships like the Lakers. Still later in the Heat, but he definitely was known as a good player by this time period. So probably Electronic Arts just saw a chance to sign up becoming sports player with a cheap contract. So. But whatever project they had in mind for him originally went to the wayside when they found out that they were found that Shaq was actually interested in and actually knew some martial arts. So somebody was inspired, just okay, well, let's put him in a fighting game then, because of course the early 90s was the whole fighting game craze with Mortal Kombat, Street Fighter, and whatever. So it's a weird mix, but on paper the project sounds pretty promising, because you have you just take a likeness of Shaq, put him in a fighting game with a bunch of other players. And make a good fighting game around it. The formula as it's drawn up is not isn't a horrible one. So, but and as Manager Joe mentioned the storyline does involve basketball a little bit. Once again, there's a charity basketball game that involved here, just like the last game we covered. This one in Tokyo, Japan. But then it goes off some very weird comic bookish directions as far as like what happens to him at this point, which is so bonkers. I'm not even going to like talk about it. But.
Then in that case, I have to write down. I have to. For my notes, I actually summarized the story.
Go right ahead.
So, Shaq stops into a dojo for whatever reason on his way to a charity basketball game. I'm assuming this is the same one that tours the world that Michael encountered in Chicago, where his players were stolen, as spoken in last episode. After speaking to the martial arts master, I apologize, I did not get his name. Shaq goes to another dimension, the second world, where he must rescue a young boy named Nezu from the evil mummy Set Ra.
Kind of shades of like my the Moonwalker here too as well. They're rescuing kids. So, but it's a wonky plot, but you don't play fighting games like their plots anyway. So
the funny thing is, like, as a kid having this on the Genesis, I don't remember there ever being a story. There probably was, but it's not something that ever.
There was
stuck
the opening
with me.
cutscenes, yeah.
So, seeing this and seeing the cutscenes and seeing the story, I started laughing, and I was just like, really? I was like, another charity basketball game? I was like, they have to be connected some way, somehow.
Genesis version also had the Genesis version also had the opening cutscenes, so you probably just like blocked it out of your memory. But
yeah, I probably skipped them just to get to the action. That's how I used to be.
Yeah. So, as far as fighting games go, the options here in this game are like pretty decent actually, because you have like you have your usual like modes of play. You have your like duel, which is like a human versus human option. Mm-hmm. You have your story mode. You go through all the fighters in order, etc. Tournament, which allows you to pick a selection of fighters to go up against, and options. And the option screen's pretty good too. It allows you to do change difficulty setting to three different settings. Listen to change the timer, and also assign for both controllers the buttons that we want to use. So. As far as modes and options here, pretty good at the start. It's all pretty robust stuff you'd find for a fighting game of this time period. So I have no problem with that. But then you get the actual gameplay. So you have a lot more experience with this game than I do, Joe. So why don't you talk about the gameplay?
Yeah. So you have your typical, punches and kicks. There is a move. Jeez, what is the? Of course, this is like the one thing I didn't write down. There's like a speed up button or something that you can use, which kind of lets you teleport. With some.
Oh yeah, the move boost.
Yeah, there we go. Move boost. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then you got your typical block where you hold back and whatnot. This. If you hold back a button and you push it forward and hit another button, you're going to do something. All these characters have some sort of special move that they do, at least one. But I think with most of them you can get at least two.
Yeah.
You get your punch and you get your kick. You get the teleport thing. One thing I found we can talk about how wonky it is, but since we are talking controls, might as well bring it up. I felt the inputs were kind of delayed. I don't know if you felt that way, but
I was going to talk about that later on with like some of the many complaints this game has. But, I agree with you.
So that kind of takes the wind out of your sails. Obviously, as a kid, I must have became adept to that delay, or there wasn't a delay on the Genesis version. I don't know. I probably should have went back and played that a bit, but I didn't remember having this much of an issue with the Genesis version. But again, that's also 30 years of rose tinted glasses, so take that with a grain of salt.
So since you already brought it up, I'll go ahead. Yeah, so I'll go ahead and talk about the controls. I also have the same frustrations. It's just not great for fighting game, and I think there's numerous reasons for that. I think that even though the first reason I think the controls suffer, and so I know this is going to sound weird, Joe, but bear with me on this. The game has very nice fluid the game has very nice fluid animation. Try to say another 10 times fast. The characters. But I think, because I think the graphics are so good, it actually makes it harder to be able to time your hits. So, because the animation is a little bit slow, it's a little bit it's so well done, it kind of distracts you a little bit, I think. And I think that in that turn makes it harder for you to time your hits, your hits correctly, which leads to some of the control problems that we had. I also think that the game itself is just something way too fast. It's so it's I'm actually surprised the Super NES game runs as fast because the whole game's hyped up on cocaine. It feels like it's the game being so fast makes it very hard for you to jump next to your opponent.
Oh my god, that was one of the other things I was going to bring up before you said you want to talk about the controls. Jumping is ridiculous.
It is,
and again, like I said, 30 years, haven't played the Genesis version, but I don't remember all you could do was either A, jump up straight up in the air, and I mean almost hitting the top of the screen, or if you jump left or right, you almost cover the entire screen. It's so pointless to jump, it's not even funny.
Yeah. And then also on top of that, motion moves have very short range. Which I was surprised by, because most fighting games usually have you have some short moves in fighting games, but you also usually have some long moves too as well. So not here. It's so you end up flowing at the air most of the time because you think you're close enough to make contact, but you're not.
Yeah.
So and then I think. So to summarize, while those things I think add to control frustration, I think the biggest issue is just that the extremely long animation cycles cause the buttons not to work as speedily as you expect them to when you push the button to do something.
Yeah, and that makes 100% sense.
So I think that the root cause, the other things don't help either, but I think it's the root cause there about the frustration both of us had the controls. So, but. Anyway, sorry, but since you brought that up, I figured it was a good time to talk about the controls.
Yeah, nope.
Spoiler, summary, they're not great. So, go on.
Yeah, so I mean, you pretty much covered everything else I was going to talk about. But we're in agreement. The controls are not good here at all. So one thing I wanted to mention is we have a total of 7 fighters. So we have Shaq, we have Kaori, who is a cat woman, literally a cat woman. There's Beast, who's a red alien kind of guy. Of course, we have Set Ra. There's Raja, who's he's our Prince of Persia representation in this game. Then we have Memphis, who looks like the Crypt Keeper. And then there's Voodoo, who is, it's a voodoo woman with the headdress and everything. So I think they have a pretty good mix of characters for Shaq to fight. In this world, I thought it was interesting that, all these characters are unique. They're all very, very unique. And then, Shaq is just very generic.
Yeah. You really can tell that Shaq was typically, Shaq's likeness was just dumped into a template or that already existed for fighting characters.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But they were counting upon his name and his fame selling the game, and for the most part it did, which we'll talk about here later on. But no, I definitely agree with of all that. Yeah, the graphics are kind of a mixed bag, I think. It's we already commented upon how the very fluid looking graphics are kind of hurt you more than they help, or whatnot. The The background's pretty good. I have no problem with the backgrounds. There's some there's nice detail for them, like use the color and whatnot. But my biggest complaint is that the player sprites, they're too small.
Yes.
Like fighting characters are supposed to be like big, huge, like to make gameplay easier as well as also to give you a sense of power. And this game just doesn't do that because of smaller graphics.
Yeah, I also agreed. I thought the graphics in the background were amazing. I thought the characters have good detail, but you can't really see it unless you got a magnifying glass sitting there looking at it. I really wish the characters were at least twice the size that they are. I think that would have been a pretty good representation. Maybe that would have taken away from like the animation that they have. And I don't know. Would that make it better? Would it make it worse? I don't know. But I mean, at this point, we're talking 1993 on the Super Nintendo. We've definitely seen other games that look a lot better, despite the fact that the backgrounds are pretty. This game just kind of falls flat in that graphics department, unfortunately. It's colorful, for sure.
Yeah, it is.
And the characters look great on those backgrounds, but same thing you said. Like, I wish those sprites were just a little bit bigger, and then we can actually see the detail that's there, because there is detail there. If you look up the sprites online, you can see the detail. It is really nice.
Yeah.
But in gameplay, not really.
Yeah. Nope, definitely agree with you there. So, music also is a mixed bag for me. The music in this game is not great, but I still think most of the songs are pretty good in that. Generic hokey fighting game style. So I mean, they get the job done. We've heard better quality music in the system for sure, but the songs at least are fine, like what they are.
Yeah, I put the sound effects are serviceable. Music is forgettable.
Yeah. Like Mortal Kombat, this game did have available blood code on it, which is available on both the Genesis and Super NES versions of the game. They're not as big or fancy as Mortal Kombat is, which is probably why the game stayed its MA13 rating on Genesis. That's the rating. That's the game rating, by the way, that we now know is T.
Yep.
Because ESRB hadn't been established yet at this time period. The blood effects overall are pretty minor, but they do give you access to finishing moves. They're triggered by striking the opponent in a certain way to end the match. So that's nice. At least the code does something for you.
Yeah.
So, but we already mentioned how downsized Super NES version of the game was. The Super NES version, the Super NES version of the game only has 7 characters compared to the 12 characters the Genesis has. The Super NES also only has 7 stages compared to the 10 stages that the Genesis had. And the Genesis version also had a stage that was accessible regularly, whereas the same stage Super NES, you had to use a code to access it. So, however, I will say as watered down as the Super NES version of the game was, the other ports, Amiga, Game Boy, and Game Gear, much worse. So, those versions really got shafted as far as what was included with them. So, I mean, handheld you understand because of handheld cart size,
right.
But even the Amiga version of the game was pretty nerfed. So, it is what it is. So, so like I said before, my only guess is that Delphine assigned their top tier talent to work in the Genesis version of the game, and just whoever was left available were hand Super NES version of the game, which is unfortunate. Now, having said that, these games' issues are so big, I really don't know how much a difference the extra characters, the character stages, story mode, overall would have had on the game. Maybe would have raised the overall quality of the game by a point or so, but it's not like you're moaning about stuff being stuff being left out of a great game. It just is like, but instead it's like insult for anybody who bought the game full price back in the day, because it's like, you're already getting a bad game. Now you're getting an inferior version of like that bad game on top of it. So, just frustrating like all around. But not the first time to see this happen, unfortunately, and probably won't be the last in covering the podcast. So, but anyway, yeah. So despite all that, though, it sounds like it sounds like I really hate the game. As much as I am bashing the game, I actually did not hate my time with it. I think the game is a serviceable fighter, at least. I mean, it's like, if you can get used to the frustrations, just like used to shortcomings and you actually can have some decent fun with the game. I thought overall the AI in this game was actually not that bad as far as like fighting game AI goes.
Yeah,
so
it's pretty fair.
I think that, and for beginner, I think the game's pretty. A beginner, if you can overcome the problems with the problems with the controls, the overall challenge for beginners is pretty good, I thought. So, I think that I've played worse fighting games on the system already at this point, for sure. So it's like, it's just a very forgettable. It was Shaq's name on the hype of the game that really stood it all up. There definitely are much better fighting games in the system. I don't think this game is like I really don't think this game's worth playing today, unless you're curious to see how it is yourself. But having said that, like I said before, I don't think this game is cracked up to be like one of the worst games of all time. It's not great, but I definitely have played a lot of worse games than this one. So I think this game is just one of several games that are very easy to like picked on, like to be punching bag of people to make fun of. And yes, it's bad, but it's not that bad. So in the end, I did have a small bit of fun with it.
Yeah, and I mean, my final thoughts are, very much mirroring yours. This is mediocre at best. Obviously, when I had it for the Genesis, it was all I had, so I got good with it. I learned to enjoy it because back then you got games for your birthday and Christmas. That was it. So you had pretty much 6 months, however time frame that was, to enjoy whatever it was that you got because you weren't getting anything else. So it's serviceable. It does its job. It's a fighter. Are there better games? Absolutely. I would rather play Street Fighter. I would rather play Mortal Kombat. But also, is it the worst? No. Let me tell you, there are two that I can think of right now that are worse for the Super Nintendo. Maybe
the same games I'm thinking of.
One is a game that you covered back on episode 73. Thank God we don't have to cover this game. That's Pit Fighter. The second one I did not see on the list, so we're at some point going to cover it, and therefore this is a spoiler, but Rise of the Robots has to be the worst game across all platforms, everything of all time. And yeah, I would absolutely play this Shaq Fu game over either one of those games.
Yeah, I've not played Rise of the Robots myself, but I have heard it's a bad game. I actually think Pitfall is bad, but Pitfall is probably
Pit Fighter.
Pit Fighter. That's probably on par for this game. Yeah. However, Rival Turfs, which I don't know why that game's on the Switch emulation, but it is. That's a horrible fighting game. It's like, ooh, boy, that one's a stinker.
Yeah,
so
that one is.
I'm not looking forward to covering that game. So that's one fighting game I can definitely say is worse than this one, I think.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, yeah. So, as you already mentioned, because Shaq was involved with this game was this game was heavily hyped and advertised before its launch, and I have to think that this has been an ongoing problem now as it was 30 years ago. It makes you question when you see the reviews of this game when the game came out, how many of those reviews were actually fair versus maybe bought or inspired by bought or paid for by somebody else. Yeah. Because of all the money that EA was throwing around at the time period. So because there are some because the reviews of this game were actually pretty mixed back in the day. So like I said, I really don't know how many of those reviews are actually honest versus influenced, but like for example, GamePro said that overall they gave the game a positive review, saying that that the graphics were small, but they liked the very fast game speed. So and they also and this also makes me think that maybe this next part makes me think the game maybe was a bot review, but they also commented on the very good controls and the present digitized graphics. So yeah, I don't know about that. So EGM gave the game like a 5 out of 10 split between the two reviewers. So there's other examples I could mention, but just like the reviews of the game like are very, very mixed. Obviously, as I mentioned before, modern reviews of the game painted it definitely like one of the 10 worst games of all time, which I really don't think it is, but it definitely has a very like negative, very much more negative perception these days. However, because of all the hype, quote unquote, about the game, and the fact that people at least remembered it, even people didn't think it was a very good game, did inspire a sequel to come out this game way back in 2018. Shaq Fu: A Legend Reborn came out for multiple systems. So did you ever play this one, Joe?
Yeah, and I love it because it pokes fun of itself, which is fantastic. And it's a side-scrolling beat-em-up, which is my bread and butter. So,
a much better design choice.
Yes. This is the way Shaq Fu should have been in the first place. But again, fighting games were hot at the time. I understand why they made Shaq Fu a fighting game. But yeah, it should have been a side-scrolling beat-em-up like Streets of Rage, like they did with the new Shaq Fu. Much better. Right,
yeah, so... I mean, like, that game's not great either, I don't think, but it definitely is better than this game is, so...
But you know what you're getting yourself into with that one. You know what
I mean? Yeah, definitely, like, for sure, so... okay, so, I mean, I definitely was curious to play this game, because I had definitely heard about it, like, over all these years, but yeah, so I'm glad I did. Not a great game, but a great game, but certainly not a horrible game either. So,
yeah.
I mean, like, if you were in Joe's situation, this is the only fighting game you had, you definitely get some fun with it. But especially since Joe had this Superior Genesis version of the game. So
yeah, and you don't have to feel bad for me because that time is over. I have learned to like good video games. So,
yeah. So no, I mean, like, the game. The game on both Superior Genesis and Genesis is pretty cheap to buy. We'll cover eBay in a moment. So don't feel bad you misplayed your copy because it's not it's not like a very valuable game in any extent, but unless you have a copy that actually was signed by Shaq, because the Shaq himself has acknowledged over the years that it's not a great game, but he's still happy to sign copies of the game and whatnot for you. So, but because that's that's how he is. That's the personality. Right. He's like, okay, this is bad, whatever. So, but keep his name relevant, relevant to folks. Yep. So it's all good. So, we mentioned some codes previously. Like any good fighting game, there are several codes in this game. Besides the blood code we already mentioned, there's one code that you can use to remove the background of the game. So you just want to have the fires themselves on a static screen. There's also a code you can use to unlock any fighter in story mode. So that's a pretty good one. Yeah. And then there's also a way to be able to get an extra continue in the game in story mode. If you go back to the Lost Jungle after finishing it, and do well enough at the bonus stage. So, a few hidden things to find here, as you would expect for a fighting game. So, proof of how well this game sold is shown by how many copies of the game are available for sale on eBay. Time doing research, there were 115 copies of the game listed on eBay, with 42 copies of the game that recently sold. As I mentioned before, prices of this game, because of its notoriety, because of how popular it was back in the day, are pretty cheap to get these days by Super NES standards. These prices include shipping as well. Current line price of the game starting from $7 to $17. So pretty cheap for Super NES game. So CIB copies were also like very affordable, anywhere from $26 to $35. So not a very expensive game to add to your collection.
Yeah, that also doesn't surprise me because, again, this was advertised as much as it was. I'm sure it sold quite a bit. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So, so it's like, I don't, so Delphine, I said before, Delphine I really like as a company. They did some very good games over the years, but they should stick to like adventure games, anytime they branched out into something like this, the results were not very good. I know companies hate to be pigeoned into something because it's like Square Enix for years was trying to get away from the image of them only being like a JRPG company. Right. But it's like it's also that's where they have their great successes at. So it's like sometimes I think it's just better off just to sigh, shrug your shoulders, and accept it, and just keep doing what you're best at. But keep that money and the fame coming in. So. If you had told me this game was Delphine, I never would have known it was Delphine game. It's like Delphine you associate with like the very beautiful rotographics that out of this world and and Flashback used. Yeah. Not this mess, but so. Like I said, the 90s were a weird time for. The 90s were overall a very weird time for game design. Period. This game is probably one of, but not the only example, not by a long shot, of like the weird times that we lived in back then. So
agreed.
But anyway, yeah. So glad you covered that finally. Do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up here, Joe?
I'm glad that we got through it. There's going to be other turds that we're going to have to cover at some point that are worse than this game. So. Gotta look forward to that. But yeah, it was fun revisiting this and, actually playing it as an adult and being able to understand everything that was going on. Whereas, like I said, as a teenager, I didn't care what the story was. I just wanted to fight. And, that's pretty much all I did until I got good fighters. So.
Yeah. Which didn't take too long, right?
No, it didn't. So, I mean, I got my Genesis with Mortal Kombat 2, so I had already had a good fighter. But, fighting games were big at the time, so I tried to get whatever I could, and Shaq Fu, like I said, was just advertised just right that, I ended up getting it, whether I requested it or not, because I can't remember. But...
You probably did.
But I probably did. There's probably some fault on my end there. But I remember, I had Street Fighter Championship Edition, and then I got Super Street Fighter 2, and I can't remember too much of my time with Shaq Fu, but I can tell you 1,000 memories with Mortal Kombat 1 through 3, Street Fighter 2 Championship Edition and Super Street Fighter 2. So I definitely I had Virtual Fighter 2 for the Genesis, which is another game that's just horrible. But it was just one of those things like that's even better than Shaq Fu. So I have decent memories of that as well.
Yeah, the arcade version of that game was pretty rough on the consoles of the time period because the game was just so advanced in the arcade. It's like you're like, there's no way they're gonna, that same problem. The Pit Fighter. That's the exact same problem Pit Fighter had because it's like it was so good in the arcades. There was no way to make it work on a console, unfortunately. But anyway. We are moving on next time to not only a much better game, but we're also going to have a guest host again with us on the podcast. We're going to be having back at the podcast Sean, who joined us recently, like for the Activizer games, to cover one of his favorite games. I didn't know it was the time period. He just saw the list we posted of our planned games about a month ago. Thanks for interest in it, and one other game Joe coming down later on down the pike, which as well. So sure, I'd like to be back again at some point as well. But anyway, we're going to be. So we're going to be looking at finally one of the last heavy hitters we have not yet covered in the podcast, Secret of Mana, speaking about Square Enix. So definitely one of the most beloved RPGs of all time, and part of a very confusing, complicated franchise. The history for that one's going to be a mess, but we will get into it when we get into it. So
yeah, and I never played it, so yay.
Yeah. Have you played any Mana game at all? Because the franchise is still going strong.
No, I haven't.
Okay.
Because
okay.
Trials of Mana, I think was one of the more recent ones to come out, and one
of the more recent ones.
Yeah. So I'd seen it and I was interested. I believe it was released for the Vita and the PS3, but I had some sort of interest in it, but then I was like, oh, I gotta go back and I gotta play Secret of Mana, and then find out that there's Game Boy games that are related, but they're not named Secret of Mana or anything like that. And it's
I said, the whole franchise. Yeah. Like I said, the whole franchise is a mess.
So I essentially was like, you know what? Nope, I'm not doing it. And then, I got the collection for the Switch. So
I will say though, as complicated and as messy as the Mana franchise is to try to get into, it's not as bad as the Tales franchise. That's even worse.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah. So we'll see you again for that episode next time around. So thank you again for being with us. You can find us on Facebook. You can also send me an email directly at thesnespodcast@yahoo.com. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, whatever, we'd be glad to hear it. Joe, where can they reach you at?
You can find me on Facebook. I'm easy to find. Also, I do another podcast called The Radical Retro Roundup. So look out for that. You can Google it. You can find it on Facebook. It's on Twitter. Not family friendly, so you've been warned. Yeah, I mean, that's generally it.
Okay, all right, sounds good. As always, thank you for listening to us. Thank you for giving us a few minutes of your day. Stay safe, everybody. Be well. Catch you again next time.
All right.
Nintendo controls 80% of the video market. But no matter how you play the game, or which game you play, things definitely have come a long way since Pac-Man.
Now you're playing with power. Deep